Hey everyone, how's it going? So today it's going to be a video about my Trek Antelope. I've had it for a while. I bought it in March last year in stock condition. This is a photo of how I picked it up. It did have a 8-speed Derailleur XT rear derailleur, but that's about the only upgrade. The previous owner bought it with him when he moved over here, and it was originally from Coolbreeze Cyclery in Mooresville, North Carolina. So he'd been using it as a commuter bike, so it suffered quite a few battle scars and stuff, as you'd expect. I tidied it up when I built it into this drop bar bike. I covered the paint chips with rust converter and stuff, that's why they're all black. I had it set up with some genetic digest bars, which are a copy of the Velo Orange Deja far bar, among with a few other names. It's quite a simple setup, 3x8 speed. 26-inch, 2.3-inch tyres. It was a really comfortable setup. I could ride it for quite a long time, especially with the Velo Orange Signy stem on it. It got the bars up really nice and high. So I had it for a while, built up like this. I think I built it up in August of last year, so a bit over a year. That may not sound like too long, but it's quite long for me to have a build in like the same exact setup. But recently I built up that Panasonic drop bar bike, which is really similar to this, so I decided just to replace it. So I thought I'd sell on the Antelope. Just as I was thinking about selling it, I got a message from Harry, who is down the line, just sort of outside of New Plymouth, asking if I had any bikes that I'd be willing to sell. And I measured it up, and it looks like the Trek Antelope would have been a nice fit for him. So I decided, yeah, I'll part with it. The time has come, and we got to talking about a bit of a setup for it. And it turns out I had a few of the parts already that he sort of wanted. So I decided to strip it down, and then we can sort of figure out the finer details from there. So he wanted it built up as sort of a commuter that can do a bit of touring and stuff as well, like some weekend trips or what have you. So the Antelope would have been a great fit for that. It's got plain gauge tubing, so it's not like the lightest and most supple ride, but it's built to last, and it does ride really nicely, especially in this larger size. I don't know if it has a little bit more flex than the smaller ones. I would say so. I don't really know because I can't ride small bikes. So it all came apart nicely. I hadn't actually pulled it apart since I built it up last year, so it's good to see that no rust had developed or anything. I did treat the inside of the tubes with Penetrol. Sometimes people use like Frame Saver or Bow Shield and that sort of thing. I use Penetrol because it's what's available in New Zealand, so it's really easy for me to get. And it works great. It sprays like nice and thin. It sprays easily. I feel like I've told you about this before. I don't know. But yeah, I use Penetrol and it's been working great for me over the years, so I keep using it. So the bike stripped down nice and easily. We won't be using all of the parts from the build, but a few of them will be used over onto the sort of new setup. So one of the things that I'll be using is the cranks. Now, because I polished these up back when I built it originally, I figured I might as well just give them like a quick auto sole just to clean them up a little bit more. Over the time, your shoe sort of scuffs up the polish finish, so it tarnishes it quite quickly. But it actually was still kind of shiny, so not the worst result. You can clear coat them, but the clear coat doesn't stick to polished cranks too well. It's sort of like, it looks like it's peeling off. So I tend to not clear coat cranks. It looks really bad. It's a lot easier to just auto sole up cranks without the clear coat on. So I gave those a quick clean up, and then found a derailleur to suit. So I had some rusted parts on it, and I think one of the pulley wheels I needed replacing. Had like a bit of slot to it. Used the Dior, I think it's an MT60 front derailleur that was already on it. So pulling apart the Dior LX rear derailleur just needed a bit of a clean up. Wasn't actually too bad though. I think I got this from Darcy, who I think cleaned it beforehand. I don't know. But thanks, Darcy, if this was from you. So I just use a bit of degreaser to clean the parts. You can use like a ultrasonic cleaner, but I just like to use degreaser. It's just so I can have like a really small setup. I might get one day, but I don't really want to fork up the space for it. So the derailleur cleaned up nicely. I use degreaser just because it makes light work of getting in between all the nooks and crannies and stuff. So I use like quite a light concentration solution, but it works really well. Sometimes I have to do it a couple of times because I don't want it to damage the alloys or anything. But basically you just let it rinse for 10 minutes. Wait, what? No, you let it soak for 10 minutes and then you rinse it all off, and it gets all the grease out from inside the derailleur and stuff. So from there I just gave bits of it autosol polish. So I use my Dremel. It's a lot easier to work the Dremel around derailleurs and like fiddly little bits. And then the bolts got some evaporust treatment. There wasn't really much that needed it. Really it was just a few bolts and then the mounts for the thummies. So they had a little bit of surface rust, so I thought I could evaporust them, etch prime them, and then paint them up. It would just tidy them up a bit. And sure enough, 24 hours in the evaporust, and it dealt to the rust quite nicely. From there I just give it like a bit of a scuff and then etch prime, and then go over with some black spray paint. So polishing up the rest of the parts, I decided not to show you all of that, but it's basically the same process that I used on the front derailleur. Just a bit of autosol and the Dremel for some of it. So the build is going to be a 3x7 bike. Keep it nice and simple. Plenty of gearing with 21 speed. So the rims are an Derailleur rim. I quite like this profile, and I think the black suits it against the red quite nicely. The hubs are a Derailleur DX. I quite like the DX hubs. They look really nice and they tend to run really smoothly. I think I've just had really good luck with most of my DX hubs that I've picked up have run really smoothly. They could have some magic in them, I don't know. So these tyres won't be kept on. These are the wheels off my Marin, but I'll be changing those up. And then I'm actually going to sell the Marin as well, because I'll be replacing that, but that's for another video. So I'll be keeping these super yummy tyres. They are really nice. I'd say they're more suited to off-road terrain, but they do run quite nicely on the road. Not super fast, but I mean, they're a great sort of all-terrain tyre, I would say. Not as fast as a semi-slick. Certainly not as fast as the Panaracer Gravel King, but they definitely handle better through the mud and dirt and stuff. So cleaning up the hubs, the co-nuts and everything look about the same as what they were when I put them together, whenever that was, last year sometime. So pretty much all good to go. Just clean them up, re-greased everything, and chuck the bearings back in. I do really like these wheels. I'd be more inclined to keep them if I was going to be using a 7-speed again. They seem to be really reliable and they still spin super smooth. I could just throw an 8-speed free hub onto it, but I've got a couple of 8-speed wheel sets kicking around that I'll be using on the replacement for the Marin build. After throwing the cone spanner on the ground, I gave the exterior of the hubs a bit of a clean up. They were still pretty tidy, so I didn't use any polishing compound or anything. And then I did the same for the rear hub. And then it was time to throw the tyres on. So he went with Gravel King SK Pluses. These are a really nice tyre. I rate them very highly. So I chucked those on, and then they were good to go. After the super satisfying removal of that cover over the lettering. I really like these tyres because they're a great sort of all-terrain tyre. You can use them on a bit of everything. Harry said that he used them on a bit of sand as well, and they were actually pretty surprising. Later on in the video, I do take them through a little bit of mud, and you can see how they perform there. They're not super supple, but you can get the right tyre pressure to make them nice and comfortable, and they do have a bit of puncture protection, so that sort of saves you there as well. So cleaning up the frame, I just used some soapy water that gets rid of lots of the gunk and stuff. So I guess this was grease that had attracted a bit of dirt and stuff around the headset by the fork crown there. and then getting in like the nooks and crannies with a toothbrush just to clean up some of that gunk. That actually looked like polish residue. After cleaning up the frame, I give it a bit of a polish up. A polish and wax helps making it easy to clean later on, so that just the dirt and stuff doesn't stick to it as easily. And it makes it look all nice and shiny if that's your thing as well. Otherwise, I guess just some wax, because polishing is really the part that restores the shine. Wax sort of just amplifies that. So this is it after the polish and wax. It came out quite nicely. I don't have a video of how it was before I picked up the bike last year, but the first polish that I did, I cleaned it up so nicely. It was a huge improvement. From there, just taking apart the headset, cleaning all that out, and then re-greasing it. It actually survived quite nicely. When water mixes with grease, it tends to go to like this sort of cloudy, disgusting mess. But I guess with waterproof grease, it's less likely to do that. So it was still a pretty good viscosity. It hadn't really deteriorated from when I first put it in. I think it had been a few months, maybe at the start of the year, I serviced the headset last. I can't remember exactly. So that little bit of grease in between the lock nuts, it just made sure that they wouldn't spin together, sort of over tightening the headset. I grease up both the wedge and the stereo tube when using a coil stem. So the bars are Nitto Albatross. These are a really nice back swept handlebar. The grip area is 22.2, so you can use thummies without any modification. These are the thummies after I've cleaned them up with some spray paint and stuff. They're pretty straightforward reassembly. It's just like one screw really, and then a couple of little plastic bits. Painting them, I use some edge primer after scuffing up the metal surface, and then once the edge primer dried, I used some black spray paint. Thummies are pretty maintenance free. They're really reliable. I don't think I've ever actually had any die. I think the most damageable thing is like the bolts and stuff. So some of them have an alloy body, like the Derailleur XT one. But these steel clamp ones, like I don't know what's going to break. They have like a few pieces on the inside, but they don't really seem to die. I've had ones that seem a little bit stiff, and then just like a soaking in some lightweight oil sort of helps them free themselves up a little bit. So I put a little bit of grease on the brake posts before putting the brakes on, and shoving the wheel in. Plenty of clearance with the 2.1 Gravel King. This did have 2.3 inch DTHs with fenders on before, so I knew that the 2.1 would fit quite easily. Greasing the bottom bracket threads. I push it in a little bit so it doesn't just bind up when you put the bottom bracket in. If you overload it too much, then yeah, it'll sort of have quite a bit of resistance when you thread it in. So I just go around with my finger and sort of push and spread it through. There's quite a bit of controversy around whether you grease up the tapers on a square taper bottom bracket or not. Safe practice is to not do it, but I do just with like a little bit of grease, like the same sort of thing, just a very tiny amount spread on the tapers. I've never had any issues with over tightening and cracking them. I think the main thing that I've read is that some of the lightweight Italian components can crack that way, but using Shimano mountain bike parts, I've never had any issues. I think to break something, you would have to put a lot of torque onto the crank, but if you just tighten them up to spec or to what feels tight to you, then you shouldn't really have any issues. They don't need to be insanely tight. Like you don't need a 1 meter long breaker bar to tighten cranks up. That seems crazy. Certainly grease up the pedal threads. You don't want a pedal stuck in a crank arm. That would just be terrible. Flat pedals, because they're really universal. You can just chuck some jandals on and go ride your bike. Or if you're across the ditch in Australia, thongs. You can just cruise on down the beach, riding along in some thongs. Sweet as. But anyway, sizing the chain, you just wrap it around like this, avoiding the derailleur. You add 2 rivets to this length, and then you got to make sure to test it as well, just to make sure that it's long enough. The chain was a little bit too slack when it was in the lowest cog in the front and back, so the chain was slapping the derailleur, which would be really annoying. But it had plenty of travel in the derailleur when it was in the largest cog in the front and back, so I could take out 2 extra rivets just to shorten the chain a little bit. Having it too long technically wouldn't damage anything, it would just be pretty annoying. Having it too short though can do some damage, so just make sure that it's long enough. That's better. And to match the silver alloy stem, I used a silver alloy seat post as well, just so it's like visually quite even. So I quickly cleaned it up with a scotch pad and some WD-40, and then I went over that with some Autosol just on a rag. I didn't want it to be too polished up, but sort of somewhere in between the stem and the cranks. So to have a bit of storage on the bike, Harry wanted a front rack and a basket on top of that. So to do this pretty simply, I use a rear rack modified sort of to put on the front. You can do this a few ways. You can make lower brackets that bolt on to the eyelets and then sort of offset the rack in any position that you want. You can also trim the top platform to shorten it a bit, just to make it look a little bit better. But for now, I just leave this basically as is. I bend up that top bracket to make it fit properly.
There we go.
Harry also wanted some fenders on the bike. It just makes things a bit more practical. I quite like having fenders on at least one bike. It's coming up to summer now, so hopefully there's not too much rain, but we do tend to get like the odd rainy day. So mounting the front went on pretty straightforward. Mounting the rear, just have to take the rear wheel out and then sort of fit things up. So bolted up straightforward using like its factory brackets and stays and stuff. And then in the front down low, I just use a cable tie. So it's quite sleek, it's sturdy enough, but it also provides a little bit of movement. So in case something gets jammed in there, it allows the fender to sort of shift around a little bit. So with them all bolted up and then the wheel back on, you can see the fender line. So it does need quite a bit of adjustment. Basically because the Maxxis DTH was quite a bit of a taller tyre, so the fender line definitely needed some adjustment there. So it's quite simple with these plastic SKS Blue Mills mudguards. It is a little bit more tricky with aluminium or stiffer plastic guards. That bit of flex helps quite a bit, I think. Setting up cantilever brakes, I've done so many of them that I find it quite simple now. Really, I set the pad at like the angle and distance away that I want. So you want the caliper to be like parallel to the rim. This varies a little bit, but basically that's a good like baseline. The most important thing is the pad angle and the straddle cable angle. So you want this to be as close to 90 degrees as you can. So you have to fiddle around with the straddle cable and the cable hanger for a little bit, just to try and dial that in. You can use a clamp to hold the brake pads in against the rim, just so you don't have to hold the calipers while you're setting that straddle cable length. But once you've done that, just cinch everything up, and then you can go through and adjust like the spring tension just to get it all centered up. Apparently using a gear cable works really well as a straddle cable because it sort of flows naturally a bit better. You can also use a spoke, but that's quite a stiff straddle cable. They hold their form nicely, so the straddle cable hanger doesn't like flop around and go out of adjustment. A spoke I don't tend to use, but gear cables do work really nicely as straddle cables. So that, and using like a compressionless linear outer cable, that helps quite a lot with lever feel and just overall brake power. So with regular coil wound cable outers, you do get a little bit of flex when you pull quite hard. Even if you if you go up to a bike now that you know has a coil wound cable on, you can sort of squeeze the brake and then make the cable like dance around a bit. So I did use linear cables on this. So in the BMX world, they're known as linear cables. In the road and mountain bike world, they're known as compressionless, but they have the same design. It's basically just linear strands of cable inside the brake outer cable, which is the same as a gear outer cable, but it costs like 3 times the price for whatever reason. So setting up the gears, I'm sorry Harry, I can't actually remember if I set up the cables indexed as well as friction. It looks like I did in the video, but for the life of me, I just can't remember. So I'm sorry. I prefer to use friction anyway. I just love the feel of it. And then seating. The Brooks B17 personally is one of my favorite saddles. It just fits me really nicely. It conforms to your shape as well. So this is a brand new one, so treating it with some proofhide, you just use like a tiny bit on the top. It spreads and sort of mounts with your body heat, so it only needs like a little bit. This does sort of change the color of the saddle over time as well. So right now it's this is the honey colored saddle. So right now it's quite like a bright orange, but it does darken over time and stuff. That's me just caressing it nice and gently. I think it's quite a nice intimate moment when you get a Brooks saddle and you're proofhiding it for the first time. This is all PG footage, so don't get too weird about it. Proofhiding underneath, it is quite coarse, so it does take a little bit more proofhide, but just make sure you get in all the nooks and crannies because it does waterproof it, and without that proofhide underneath, then it's just going to deteriorate the saddle once it gets like waterlogged. But also fenders help quite a lot with that. To get in the small little spots, I use like a tissue, or you can use a brush or something like that to sort of get in the tight little spots. As well as being really comfortable, the Brooks B17 looks really nice as well. So as a grip for the handlebars, we went with just some bar tape. This is the bar tape that came off the bike. I think it suits the colorway of the bike really nicely. I'm not going to say what bar tape it is. I've since been put off. I've had a couple of like strange, not interactions, but experiences using them, so I'm not going to use them again. But if you do find something similar that you like and you can get it pretty quickly, then go for it. That is quite a comfy bar tape and it stands up to the test of time. So the product is nice, but the interactions with them just not being great. So it is a little bit dirty, but it's going to get dirty pretty quickly anyway, because those little triangles there, they used to be white. So you get that with white bar tape and stuff. So wrapping it actually worked out really nicely. I didn't know if it was going to go too well, sort of wrapping past the lever and the shifter, but it worked out really well. So the tape went behind the shifter and the lever, but you could still sort of access the bolts. And throwing the Wald 137 basket on, I tend to just cable tie them on. So I've never had any issues with cable ties. Holding a basket on, it can hold like a pretty decent amount of weight if you use like 6 or 8 or so cable ties. So this is the bike all done. Brooks B17 looking really nice. It came together really nicely, and it's time for a test ride. Gotta. Through.
So this is Craigavon Park. I park pretty close to my house. Often take it as a bit of a detour on the way home. Low gear, crawling on over stuff, a little slip. But that was more because of a bad line choice than anything. I don't want to get the tyres too muddy. Going back down the same route now. So it's actually better than I thought it would be. I don't know if it's because the seating position, because I'm quite upright, I have a little bit more traction on the rear, or what. It was better than I thought it would be. I have rode them through mud before, but you never know. Yeah, really good. Could have been a bit of the gearing as well. Oh yeah. But yeah, great. Considering they're not mud tyres, but I didn't get stranded. That's fine. I was not in the right gear for that. And it's a road bike. Gravel King.
Overall, the test ride went really well. There are a few things I needed to change. The fender line basically just needed like a little bit of adjusting. And then I changed the front rack as well, so I trimmed that and sort of bent up the rear of it just to make it look a little bit nicer. Also sort of permanently mounted it, so it's got a coin holding it down as well. And a couple of little things, like the valves weren't lined up properly. I don't know if I just missed that when I was putting it together or what, but I straightened those up and then gave it like another little once over and bolt check. Then threw my valve caps on it just for like a nice little finishing touch. I really like this setup. It's sort of like a nice towny cruiser, but because it's got some Gravel Kings on it, it can still go off-road and have a bit of fun that way. It does actually wheelie pretty well as well, because the bars are up sort of high, so you can get your weight back quite nicely. So it was kind of sad seeing it go, but there's plenty of other cool bikes for me to tinker on. So I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy, ride safe, and have fun. Bye. Why do you keep adjusting? Stay. Good. Yeah, this should be on the other side. It's supposed to make life easier.